Due to the deliberate starting of a fire, I cannot collect any damages, so I am hoping you will be kind enough to pay these bills. I don't mean to be nasty about this, but would like to be compensated for the following. New carpet, $50. Spring and mattress, $200. Drapes that police have, $50. Rug that police have, $20. Gun that police have, $200. Holster that police have, $300. Repair to neighbor's cottage that Norma put a bullet in, $285. Thank you very much. There's a lot that troubles me about the facts of this case, but that letter is right up there at the top of the list. It got sent to Norma's grieving family by Alice Waldron. Setting aside the fact that the police did not appear certain the bullet that went into the next-door cottage was even shot by Norma from the front porch, as Waldron alleges, why didn't Alice look to her son to repay the debt? It does not appear that Robert Elton Waldron was taught about accountability. One of the witnesses who heard shots that morning and had gone outside in an effort to ascertain from where they were coming also shed some light on Norma's relationship with her mother-in-law. In her witness statement, she said that Norma mentioned that when her mother-in-law was living at the cottage, she had nowhere she could go to escape. Alice was described in this statement as a compulsive talker and somewhat domineering, while Norma herself was described as being very bubbly, outgoing, and very pleasant to talk to. She described the mother-in-law as living with them, and Waldron himself says she came up once every 3 weeks or so, for a week. That's a lot. There is no doubt that this arrangement caused friction in the Waldron household. Her employers said that Norma would appear for work early and leave late in an apparent effort to avoid her home life. Anna Hosey of the Midway grocery store described Norma as very pleasant and outgoing, and she said she was reliable in her work habits. She said she didn't talk much about her home life, but recalled her once saying, "Why should I work 40 to 50 hours a week when he just sits around?" Miss Hosey knew personally of occasions where Mr. Waldron was given several job opportunities, but he never followed up on the employment prospects. Employees at Fairview Floral said Norma was the type of person who would expend a lot of extra effort in getting her job done. Her personality was described as outgoing, and normally not the type of person who would put someone down. However, during the course of her employment, Norma expressed that she was unhappy at home, and that her husband would constantly place fault with her for things that might go wrong. Another employee said Norma was not allowed to rearrange the furniture because of how often Alice visited. Apparently, the woman did not want anything in the cottage moved. This employee believed Norma was being emotionally abused by her demanding husband. She stated that they had had a previous conversation about a TV program called Help Me Die, and it dealt with the suicide attempt of a cancer patient. Norma made the statement that she could understand if someone was suffering excruciating pain and death was immediately expected. In that case, she might be able to help someone commit suicide, but in no other circumstances would she consider such. The employee also said she was aware of Norma making plans to visit her daughter in the summer and that Waldron did not like the idea of that visit. She told the detective that Norma had seemed excited about her brother and family coming to visit on the 4th of July. The owners of the flower shop described Norma at work 2 days before the shooting. She came in and her face was very puffy and she suffered a dizzy spell. They said that they had the impression that she'd been crying for an extended period of time. Norma claimed she had been up all night and had gone to a doctor as the result of being bitten by a spider. This would explain the diphenhydramine found in her system by the medical examiner, along with caffeine when she died. They said they got a call on Monday after the murder at 8:30 a.m. from Mr. Waldron, who explained that his wife would not be into work because she had shot herself and died. No further explanation was given. Later that day, Alice Waldron called the flower shop and made arrangements for a casket blanket. Mr. Zagman of Zagman Memorial Chapel had been contacted about funeral arrangements. He'd been a mortician in the family since 1965 and had experience with victims of suicide. In his opinion, the placement of the gunshot injury was rather unusual, so much so that he mentioned it to Detective Miller. He also informed the detective that Waldron had stated that he wanted to have Norma cremated and that her ashes would be taken to Florida for burial next to her former husband. But Norma's brother contacted the funeral home and objected to the cremation plans. Waldron agreed to the wishes of the family, but stated that he could not be liable for the expenses incurred. Those expenses were transferred to the family of the deceased. The funeral director also relayed the story Waldron told him about the events of the shooting, including him fighting the fire and fighting for the gun, which he was unable to get from her. The neighbor said he thought her nose looked broken when they wheeled her out on the stretcher. The ME reports bruising on both cheeks and a black eye. Waldron himself said he might have kicked her at one point. Does that kind of a scuffle, while Norma allegedly had a death grip on the gun, seem plausible? Once she took a few punches to the face, is it realistic to believe he couldn't have gotten that gun from her? All of the EMTs were asked about the state of the home, and no upturned furniture or signs of a prolonged struggle were noted. One EMT mentioned that what he remembered as odd was that Mr. Waldron referred to his wife by the name Kathy, not Norma. Another person interviewed was Mr. Cook, who was a part-time city police officer who also owned and operated a trash pickup. The Waldrons were on his route. He'd picked up almost on a weekly basis, although they didn't have a contract with him. They'd pay in cash after the trash was picked up. He noted that he'd picked up 3 days after the murder, and there had been a large red wool blanket with a dark stain on it, as well as a section of rug. Prior to that, he thought it had been about a month since their last pickup. He would generally pick up when they left out a bag. They may have been trying to save money, and Waldron had just been availing himself, illegally, of the local dumpsters, as he said he did the morning of the murder, due to the cat having gotten into the smelly trash. It would make sense that if you were going to start stuffing your trash into local dumpsters to save money, you'd do it early in the morning to avoid getting caught. Waldron made some calls after his first meeting with Michigan State Police ended at 8:35 a.m. That's what he did instead of rushing over to the hospital to see how Norma was. One of Norma's brothers said that he was called at about 9 a.m., and this is what he was told. Waldron woke up, took the trash out to a dumpster or a roadside park, came home and found the shed door open, and was searching the shed area when he heard screams. He looked up and saw flames inside the house. He told Norma's brother he grabbed a garden hose and ran into the house and fought the fire. He said Waldron told him he had grabbed the blankets from the bed and threw them on top of the box that was on fire. But why would you need to do that if you have a hose in your hand? Remember, Waldron had told a neighbor in his first iteration of the story that Norma had been the one to pull the covers off the bed and put them atop the box that was on fire. He even told the neighbor that Norma had said she was sorry. Waldron told Norma's brother that after he had fought the fire in the bedroom, he turned and saw Norma with the gun. He then told her brother that he had gotten involved in a fight with Norma and he'd been able to get the gun from her. He said that upon obtaining possession of the gun, the fire flared back up, and he ran to fight it. He didn't mention to the brother what he did with the gun once he gained possession of it. Norma's brother told Detective Miller that he had called a friend of Norma's later in the day and learned that she had been called around 10 that morning. The story Waldron told her had differences. Waldron told Norma's friend the same thing he'd first told the neighbor, that it was Norma who had pulled the bed sheets off the bed and put them over the box that was on fire. She was told that Waldron had not been able to get the gun from Norma. These discrepancies caused Norma's brother to sit down and write out exactly what he remembered Waldron had told him on the phone. Another story relayed by Norma's brother was that in January of 1981, 6 months prior to the murder, Norma spent a week and a half with him in Ohio for New Year's. She had driven the 6 hours from Michigan by herself, and when she arrived, mentioned to her brother that she'd gotten her car stuck in a snowbank near her home when she tried to leave. She told him she had walked back to the cottage, grabbed a shovel, and dug her vehicle out of the snowbank. When he asked his sister why Bob didn't help get the car out, she said that when she left, Bob wasn't around. He had been cutting wood, and she didn't want him to know she was leaving. Remember Eve and Sharon? They had both done the same thing, run away when he wasn't looking. When Norma's brother talked to Waldron the night of the shooting, on Saturday, to advise that he and his wife would be up on Monday, Mr. Waldron stated, "I'll dispose of her things up here." When they arrived at the cottage, all his sister's belongings were packed up and sitting out on the front porch. When he asked if Waldron would be coming to Arkansas for the funeral, where her family was, Waldron declined and said he couldn't handle it. The brother also told Detective Miller that he had never known his sister to fire a weapon, and he did not believe that she had shot herself. It's fair to note that family is often in disbelief when suicide occurs, even when prior suicidal or depressive states are noted. But I also think it's fair to say that when there's only one other person present when a possible suicide occurred, there shouldn't be a bunch of inconsistent statements. Also, suicide doesn't often follow an aggressive physical altercation accompanied by a fire. There was a lot going on in that cottage that day. The Waldron's next-door neighbor was never given the sequence of events, but he did note that the day after the shooting, Waldron contacted him late in the afternoon and pointed out a small hole in the neighbor's vinyl siding and said he suspected that it was caused when his wife fired the gun outside. Together they inspected the interior of his home and determined that the slug had not penetrated the inside wall, but had been lodged somewhere in between. When Detective Miller contacted Mr. Waldron on June 15th, 2 days after the murder, it was at that point that Waldron mentioned the bullet in the cottage next door. The neighbor gave permission for Detective Miller to recover the slug from the siding. Now is probably as good a time as any to discuss that gun and the fingerprint evidence. So what usually happens when a gun's fired, and law enforcement needs to determine who fired it? Gunshot residue test, right? Excellent. Let's test Norma's hands, and we can have this all over in time for lunch. Yeah, that's not how it works. First, the detective sent the box of cartridges, the plastic container they were in, and the slug retrieved from Norma's brain, along with a standard of prints taken from Norma, to the crime lab for latent print development and comparison. In the notes section, the report reads, "Request the development of fingerprints on the inside of the white plastic carton and the 2 Wildcat cartridge boxes. I am attempting to show or discount that the victim had handled the box of shells. Husband having access to and handling the items is not in question." The notes on the page for the slug reads, "Request the comparison of items number 3, lead slug recovered from deceased victim, and number 18, lead slug recovered from outside wall of neighboring cottage, with weapon listed as item number 1, 22 caliber 9-shot H&R revolver. This officer realizes it's unlikely that a comparison could be made with the slug recovered from the victim, as it is badly deformed. However, please advise for the benefit of the prosecutor." The damaged siding was also sent for testing to determine the direction from which the bullet had entered, as well as a blank notepad found at the residence to determine if anything of value had been written on it. I could almost feel the frustration of the detective through the faded pages of the police report as I read the results from the FBI regarding the gunshot residue test.
Result of examination. Normally, specimens such as those submitted could be analyzed for the elements antimony and barium, which are components of the primer of most cartridges. However, the ammunition reportedly used in this shooting is .22 caliber ammunition of Winchester manufacture. In the experience of the FBI laboratory, this type of ammunition does not contain both antimony and barium in the primer mixture. Since both must be present before any meaningful examination can be conducted, no primer residue examination was conducted on the submitted swabs. For future reference, it is noted that the FBI laboratory has been conducting gunshot residue examinations on specimens taken from the hands of suicide and homicide victims. These examinations have been conducted despite the long-standing view of this laboratory that the presence of gunshot residue on a victim's hand or hands must also include the possibility that the victim was shot at close range by another person. Because of the ambiguity of the results obtained by analyzing specimens from the hands of shooting victims, such specimens are no longer being examined.
And what about the fingerprints on the gun and box of shells?
The interior of the white plastic container and the cartridge boxes were processed for possible latent prints. Latent printage structure found contained insufficient characteristic ridge detail to be of value for the purpose of identification.
I found myself closing my eyes and taking into account the shape of objects, guessing how I'd grab them and manipulate them in my hands, and what kinds of prints I'd leave in doing so. I imagined that box of ammunition, how I'd grab it out of the plastic container and open it and take out 3 bullets, imagining the areas of the box where the pads of my fingers might come into contact. I think we always assume if someone touches something, a usable print will be found. That's not always the case. Another big problem is that the autopsy report reads undeterminable for manner of death. It's at that point in the report you begin to realize that with only 2 people present when the incident occurred, one of whom can't share her side, it's going to be an uphill climb for any prosecutor. In a supplemental dated July 2nd, it's noted that the prosecutor was contacted about drafting a search warrant for the phone records of the Waldron residence. It was also requested that Michigan Bell Corporation suppress knowledge of this warrant for a period of 30 days because Detective Miller feared the suspect might flee the state. And flee he did. But this is how that went down. The investigation went on for a few months, during which time a clear pattern emerged regarding Waldron's violent history with women, repeated stalking, threats of violence, and multiple incarcerations. Every woman they spoke to had a horrible story to tell. On September 23, 1987, Waldron was recontacted by Detective Miller and interviewed again. Waldron repeated the story supplied in his initial interview, with one major difference. Subject stated that although he didn't see his wife fire the fatal shot, he did, in fact, see her standing and collapse onto the small stool next to the sliding glass entranceway. Waldron agreed when Detective Miller pressed him on the fact that his wife's actions didn't make sense as to a self-inflicted injury. However, he denied being the person who shot his wife. When asked if there was another person in the home at the time of the incident, Waldron said there had been no one else and that his wife had shot herself. At this interview, Waldron consented to a polygraph and even asked Detective Miller to provide transportation. The polygraph was scheduled for 2 weeks later. During this time, a request was being made for an arrest warrant. 9 days after the polygraph, it was learned from his son that Robert Elton Waldron had fled the state the day he took the polygraph. It was believed that he had headed to Florida. On November 23rd, Detective Miller contacted the prosecutor about the warrant. He was advised that, while they believed all the information indicated that Robert Waldron did, in fact, kill his wife, there was a lack of definite, confirming evidence to allow successful prosecution. They would not authorize a warrant unless sufficient additional information could be ascertained. The next 2 years of activity in the report is scant at best. A change of address was obtained from the post office that showed Waldron had his mail forwarded to Alice Waldron's residence. At the end of 1988, Waldron had returned to the cottage and was living there on a full-time basis. 2 Freedom of Information requests were made that year, so someone certainly wanted to know what was going on with the case. They were requested not to release all the information at that time. The case was made inactive at the end of 1989, and the next 20 years is accounted for in the report by 2 pages of journal entries. Basically, they were keeping track of where Waldron was living, but nothing else appears to have occurred as far as the active investigation. In 2008, it was learned that Robert Elton Waldron had died the previous year, and the case was closed. The final remark was the following: Robert Waldron has died and prosecution is no longer available. Authorization granted to destroy all evidence.
Let's see, I think my parents divorced. It must have been before I was 5. I'm not real clear on that because it was so long ago. And I haven't ever really asked a lot of questions. But by the time when she died, we had just barely started our relationship. So I met my mom for the first time when I was 18. She came down to Phoenix, and we got to spend a week or two together. And then I want to say March of, golly, what year would this have been? I was 19, so probably 1985 in March. I flew out to Florida and stayed with her for a few weeks. And this was when her husband, Cy, had recently passed away. So, some of the things that we had planned, she obviously wasn't in the mood to do. We were going to, take like a little cruise and stuff like that. But instead, we just kind of hung out. We went to Epcot, and we visited some other family in Orlando. And I think I was there about 3 weeks. So I didn't really know her very well, but what I understood of her personality, she was very warm. She was very friendly. There was never any negative talk from either her or my father regarding their relationship, or even just about each other. They only had good things to say about each other. So I think that was unusual. But as far as our relationship went, we weren't really sharing anything that was real deep at that point. It was still just very, on the surface, getting to know each other. But I enjoyed finding out some of the mannerisms that I saw her do. And like we both have a tendency to, when we're drinking like coffee or tea or something like that, we leave the spoon in and hold it with our finger while we're drinking out of the cup. And then none of us would, and my daughter does the same thing, we don't ever finish a drink. Like there's always like an inch or two in the bottom of whatever we're drinking. So it was just funny to like go, okay, those are where those little quirks come from. And I'm sure my father noticed those, because he used to say you're a lot like your mom. That did pop out from time to time. So it was fun to like meet her and find out, okay, there's where the weird comes from. So
I love that detail, the spoon in the coffee cup. That's great.
Yeah.
That's very good. So do you recall being contacted by police?
Yeah. The whole thing was kind of strange because really what happened was I called her the following January of '86 to tell her that I was getting married. And she said, oh, well, I got married last week. And I thought, I misunderstood what she was saying. I'm like, what do you mean you got married last week? Because she had been dating a man that I met when I came to see her in Miami. And I thought, that's kind of weird. Like, did you just up and marry him? And she said, no. She had gone down to the Florida Keys and she met this man and they had gotten married over this week or weekend or whatever. And it's at the time it struck me as very odd, and it bothered me because she didn't tell me. I was calling to tell her I was getting married, and here she was saying, well, I went and got married, and, anyway, it was just peculiar. And then they immediately, it seemed like they moved from Florida and went to Michigan, and again, I thought that was odd. And then early on, when they were in Michigan, she asked for me not to call her at home because it was uncomfortable because he was there and I guess his mother was there. And so she said she couldn't really have a private conversation at home anymore and to just call her at work, and she was working at a veterinarian's office. So, it was like she uprooted her whole life, left Florida, went to Michigan. It just, and I was very young. I was 20, so, I barely got my feet under me at this point. I'm a very young adult. So I wasn't able to say, hey, what are you doing? Why are you doing this?
Right.
I didn't really question her. I shared those things with my fiance and then later my husband. because I just said, this is really, bothering me. Should I go down there? And he said, no, maybe she'll come here. We could invite her out. That never happened. So yeah, when the police called me and said, what can you tell us? That was pretty much all I could say. Was I knew that the situation at home had gotten to the point where she didn't feel comfortable calling me from her house and didn't want me to call. They asked me if I thought, did she think she was ever in danger at any point? Had she ever said anything like that? And, I had to be very honest and just say no. There was nothing in any of the conversations that I had with her, and we were on the phone a lot, writing stuff back and forth and on the phone, but you can only do so much with a phone call. You're not really, you can't see their face, you can't really tell if there's anything going on that they're not really
right
saying.
Yeah, that is strange that she would say don't call her at home. And she didn't go further into why, other than the fact that it was just uncomfortable for her to have private conversations?
She said she felt like she had made a mistake and she felt like he didn't love her. She did tell me that much. But that's as far as it. He didn't love her. That was, she says, I just don't think he loves me. So, but that's it. She never said anything like, I'm concerned for my well-being, I'm concerned for my life. There was nothing. At the time that she died, she had made arrangements to go see her brother. And I don't remember which brother that was. I don't know if there was a birthday coming up. It seemed like there was a family event. It's been too long ago now. I just can't quite remember. But it was normal, for her to, go see her family and stuff like that. So she was just going to go and hang out with family for a few days. And I think that trip never happened. I think he killed her before she left.
Yeah.
Wow, that just puts a different perspective on it, knowing that, how that sort of happened. And I hadn't even heard about the call thing. I know she had some issues with her mother. Mother-in-law, excuse me. Do you remember anything specific, her telling you about her relationship with her mother-in-law?
No, no. She didn't say anything to me.
What about him? Did she specifically say anything about Mr. Waldron?
No, just that she didn't think that he loved her, and it was just uncomfortable for her to be on the phone at home. So
that must have been a big change. If she had a good relationship with Mr. Bailey and then jumped to this relationship. That's a big change.
Right. Right.
And so in the last few conversations you had, was there anything in these conversations that made you think that she was so despondent that she would kill herself?
No, she was excited. She liked the job. She had got a job at a veterinarian's office. She was enjoying that. She was enjoying getting to know the area. She was enjoying, getting to know a few people. I don't remember names or anything, but no. That was the thing. I really don't believe that she killed herself. I think what was the detective's name? I want to say Detective Sergeant Miller.
Yeah.
Miller, yeah. Mm-hmm. When I spoke with him, the impression that I have was that I don't know what kind of gun was used, but the impression that I got was that's not something that you could hold, and I thought that the injury wound was at the front.
Yes.
Wasn't it at the front of her head? And right. I think if you were going to kill yourself, I think you'd hold the gun to the side. And then also, I never really paid strict attention, but I'm ambidextrous, and my mother, I think, was left-handed. So right. That's, for us, if that ever were to arise, it could be right or left. For me, it wouldn't matter. I can do both things, but I can do anything with both hands. But I think my mother was left-handed.
Yeah, that's when the report and what you're saying about the gun is accurate as far as my portrayal too, because it was a long-barreled blue steel revolver, and so it was like the barrel itself was like 5 inches long, so it would be really awkward.
You can't hold that out in front of yourself and hold it. It doesn't work that way. It doesn't work that way. Right. And then wasn't there something about a fire? I thought that the kitchen was on fire, or some part of the house was on fire.
Yeah, it was the bedroom, and I'll go into that more in depth because that was a part of his. I mean, there was definitely a fire, and I go into it, and in the podcast, so there was so much going on that it does seem like strange. I mean, there was also, according to him, a fight between them. He was hitting her. And so it just doesn't feel like if you're having a fist fight with someone. He says he was fighting with her over the gun, and that he punched her and kicked her, and a lot of stuff happened. None of it really lines up. I have not spoken to one person. Right. Not even one person believes that she shot herself.
No, and the detective, when I talked to him, said he's giving us too many different stories. Like, he keeps contradicting himself. Right. So and my overall impression was that the forensic evidence was sent out of state and it was corrupted somehow, and so whatever they did have wasn't admissible in court. Like, when the detective called me, he's basically saying, is there anything you can do to help us, prove a case against this man? Can you give us anything? And I could not, because she never said, my life is in danger, I don't feel safe, I need to leave, I feel threatened. There was never anything that she said that they would have been able to act on. And, I could have lied, and, because I didn't think that she killed herself, but, it's just not me. I just can't do that.
Right.
But I really was surprised that no conviction came, that they couldn't even, I guess, get into court.
Yeah,
everything was just thrown out. So
the difficult situation. Yeah.
It was just completely botched up. So it was unfortunate.
Do you know if she ever had any experience with guns growing up?
Not that I'm aware of.
Okay, even her brother.
I was surprised that there was even anything in the house. I don't know.
I don't know. I have no indication that she knew about that gun or not. Where it came from a drawer, supposedly in the TV desk, and I haven't spoken to anyone or read anything in the report that suggests she ever had any. Had ever shot a gun or had ever had any experience, but she said she had when she was younger. So I'm sure it sounded made up, like most of what he said, but I just thought I'd ask and see. Do you know, let me ask you this, do you know if she had any stomach or ulcer issues that were causing her any issues right around that time?
No, I'm not aware of that. She never said anything to me.
In the interview, and if you listen to the podcast, you'll hear the ones specifically with him speaking, the interviews, he had said she woke him up that morning around 5:30, saying that he needed to take her to the hospital. She wasn't feeling well. And he says, no, I'm not taking you to the hospital. You're getting yourself all worked up. And I don't have specific information, obviously, about her any medical issues, but it sounded from the discussion like she had some stomach pains or something. But you're not aware of any stomach issues or anxiety issues or depression or any kind of medical issues that would play into this at all?
No. Mm-mm.
Okay, and I think that basically I don't, when he says that in the interview, when he says, while they're interviewing him, it sort of stands out like I've always thought that there was something going on that morning. It didn't happen the way he said it was happening, and there was some altercation that morning that was an inciting incident that started this. And so I was just trying to figure out first of all, if I told my husband I don't feel good, I need to go to the hospital, he would take me to the hospital. That doesn't make sense. So, and him saying, no, you're getting yourself all worked up. So it definitely feels like he lost his temper. And when you look at all the information as a whole, particularly the reports that I have been able to get with other women, he had a very specific MO. He did the same thing with every one of them.
Everyone.
Yeah. I think the detective had told me that he had prior history of taking shots at women as they were trying to leave him or something.
Absolutely.
I can't remember exactly what the words were, but that's the impression I have.
Yeah.
So.
Well, I think I pretty much went over all my questions, and I don't want to keep you because I just wanted to get your perspective, and I knew it was around that time limited, but I just wanted to make sure if there's anything else that you remembered that would add to it. But it sounds like basically she realized pretty quickly that she had made a mistake as far as marrying him, and then I think she was probably trying to figure out, how do I get out of this? And my guess is she was trying. Yeah. She told him that morning, "I'm going to leave." He may have hit her, and she may have said, "That's it, I'm leaving," and that's what happened.
Yeah, it could be. Yeah, if she had, made clear to Casey and I, my husband, that there was anything really wrong, I mean, we would have gotten on a plane and just gone down there. I would have called one of her brothers and said, she said she doesn't feel safe. What are we going to do? We need to do something.
I don't think it got that far. I think because he lashed out, Waldron, so quickly when someone said they wanted to leave, that was like his trigger. I don't think there was too much of a lead up. I don't even know if there was physical violence before that. I think she probably was considering it, and there wasn't really anything to tell you at that time other than what she told you, that she didn't feel like he loved her. And so I wouldn't think too much about that, because I don't think there was anything before that would have clued you in. I think it just happened. It probably surprised her just as much when he hit her, and then it was, I'm getting out of here, and then everything escalated fast.
It's a lot of, looking back and going, oh, okay, this could have, but you don't know. You don't know what you're even supposed to be looking for. It's just, the whole thing was just odd. Getting married at the spur of the moment, that has always struck me as very, very peculiar.
Was she impulsive that you knew of? Was that something?
I don't really know. I really don't. I don't think so. I mean, because she was married to Cy for so long.
Right.
And that relationship had to have been solid. She never said anything negative about that relationship to me. And when we initially made the arrangements for me to come out and see her, she was still married at that point. So, I was going to meet him, and I was curious, so no. And the job that she had, I think they were property managers together in Florida before Cy passed away. So, I mean, just her lifestyle, the home that she lived in, everything was neat, organized. There just didn't seem to be any real disarray about her lifestyle.
Right.
And it's such a drastic change from him to Waldron. One thing I did learn, though, is that he did meet and marry or get into a relationship with a lot of women, and then it went bad with every single one. And it suggests to me that he was drastically different in the beginning of the relationship than when it turned. That's the one thing I can't wrap my head around. How did all these women get involved with this man? And every one of them seemed to be sweet, loving women. And so it just has to be that he presented himself one way in the beginning, and then it just turned drastically at some point, is what it feels like.
Turn on the charm.
Yep.
Turn on the charm, and then... Yeah.
Absolutely. Carrie, I so much appreciate you talking to me. This isn't a topic I'm sure that you really want to, go over and over, but I just wanted to get her daughter's perspective.
I appreciate you looking into it. It's unfortunate that it happened the way that it did. It's a warning, I think, to women, just be careful. But also, I know that it's an old case. I know it's over and done with, but if what you're doing right now can help it not happen for someone else, that's good.
When I first started asking questions, a lot of people really liked your mom, and they came out of the woodwork contacting me saying, whatever happened to her? What happened to this woman? She was so sweet. Her neighbors that she hadn't really, she only knew him a year or so. What happened? Nobody knew. And so she was a really kind person that everyone really liked. No one said a bad word about her.
I've never heard anybody say anything negative about her.
And that's why I wanted to mainly do this, is so everyone knew that what he said happened didn't happen. And so I wanted them to at least have that much closure. That was as much as I can offer. So
I really do appreciate you doing this. I gave myself closure a long time ago, because you just have to forgive people. And I didn't want to carry around anything in my heart that is going to hurt me in the long run. And for me, that was forgiving this man. I'm like, okay, eventually you're going to meet your maker, and I wouldn't want to be in your shoes when that happens. But, I just would like for it to never happen to anyone else. So.
Same here.
Yeah.
it looks like your mom was and Waldron were divorced in 1975, if I have the right dates. And the reports that I have of the harassment that she endured took place over a period of time almost 2 full years later after that. How old were you in 1977?
I was 7. No, wait a minute. No. I was 12. Silly. I was 12 in 77. So I was like, 8, 9 when they were married?
So do you remember him specifically?
A little bit. Like, there was nothing. I don't remember. I remember we didn't do a whole lot together. Like, I remember him being at the house and stuff, but like, Mom always did the father-daughter stuff with me in school. Like, he didn't participate in that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
I don't remember him a whole lot. I remember moving because she wasn't happy. I don't remember any violence in the house while we lived there. And then we moved, and then I think maybe it was during their divorce was the only time that I remember her getting hurt. And that's when you mentioned the police reports in your message, I was curious because, that's the only thing I remember. After we moved, we lived in some apartments, and there was spray paint on our vehicle one morning.
Oh, wow.
Like, he had spray painted whore all over her Bronco. And one day, her and her girlfriend was driving, but they picked me up from school, and Mom's mouth was all bloody because they arranged a meeting, I guess, like for her to pick up some more stuff or something. And I don't remember the whole story. I just remember she got hit in the face. Either she got knocked down and hit, or a table flew at her or something, but it broke her teeth out.
Wow.
Because after she got her teeth fixed up, they would like glow in a black light.
Oh.
Like, years later she would joke about that, but
oh, bless her heart.
Yeah, that was awful. Yeah.
When this injury of hers occurred, it occurred during the time after they were divorced or while they were getting divorced?
I believe it must have been during the divorce. It was either during or, maybe part of the settlement. She was supposed to go get stuff. What was the police report from?
There was no physical anything mentioned in the police report. That's why I'm so shocked about this.
Wow.
That occurred in 77, and there was like a 3-month period where what happened was he had basically stalked her where she lived, and she had a male friend named Donald Remiersma, I believe. Waldron had called her one night and said, "I don't want you having male friends over." And they've been divorced for 2 years, and he's saying this. So the police were called, and it went over like a few-month period because he actually got thrown in jail. She participated in helping the cops find him. He did like 76 days of a 90-day jail sentence, and then the day after he got out, he went right over and started harassing her again. So I don't know when this abuse occurred with regard to that, whether it was before or after, but his behavior was certainly escalating.
I think she met him after, when we lived up in Michigan. because she went on to she went to finish high school because she was very young when she had me. And she finished high school at Rogers and graduated maybe 72, something like that.
I have such a hard time understanding how this man was able to attract so many women when it went so badly for every single one. He must have been so different in the beginning and then just changed, drastically.
Right.
Oh boy. Do you remember his kids?
I do, a little bit. So I didn't spend a lot of time with them either. I mean, none of us we spent a little bit of time together, just around the house and holidays, stuff like that.
Yeah, she did. Kyle did mention, she said, Terry had a very vivid memory of playing with you and really liking you and being sad because what happened is their mom, Kelly, brought them over to that house one day, I guess, to see you, and that you were all gone. You had moved, and none of them knew what happened.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so her memory is just from a little girl who had this playmate, and then all of a sudden her playmate was gone, and so she had the sad
memory of it. Yeah. There's a lot of things I think maybe I just blocked a lot of stuff out.
Yeah, I'm sure. I talked to another daughter of one of his other female friends. Her name was Barbara, and basically she didn't know any of it either. And I think the thing is, your mothers protected you. They didn't want you to see any of this, so they did what any good mother does, and they didn't let you see that side of the things. I'm surprised that you had even seen that she had been physically hurt, but, it's kind of hard to hide that. So I want to just end with this. When she got away from him, did she have a happy life?
She did. She eventually remarried in the mid-'80s. I have a brother and sister that she had later in life. She did. She passed away in 95 of breast cancer.
Oh my goodness, I'm sorry.
But she was, happy, vibrant, fun. Yeah.
Well, I'm glad she got away, and she did have a good life, because that provided that for you, but you had.
So, I think I've made myself pretty clear that I don't think Norma Waldron shot herself. For starters, under the category of past behavior being a good predictor of future behavior, it appears that Robert Waldron was violent, aggressive, stalked, and threatened pretty much every woman he married or lived with, at least the ones that I was able to track down information on. He had a history of waving a gun around and telling every one of those women what he planned to do with it. I think it's likely that she was sitting on that stool when he shot her, just like they found her, and he just placed the gun and bullets by her to stage the scene. I think it's possible that he took the gun out sometime after he put that fire out, maybe while she had plunked herself down on that stool. She might have even been crying. I don't doubt that she didn't feel good. She was upset. She was frustrated. He said himself, at least in some of the accounts, that Norma was the one who had put the fire out by pulling the blankets down on top of the box, and she said she was sorry. I can almost hear it. She's scared because she can see how infuriated he is, and he's running straight at her from the shed, screaming obscenities at her. But what I don't get is what happened to make her set that fire. If there was no incident that morning between the two of them, it really doesn't seem to make sense that she would get out of bed, realize he was not there, and decide to start a fire in the bedroom. It feels like there's a hunk or two of information that we just don't have. Like something else may have gone on before he left the house that morning, other than him being irritated that she had asked him to take her to the hospital. Had they been arguing on and off since the day before?
There's a scream from the house, a yell, scream, yell, and I didn't pay too much attention to it because my wife had been bugging me last night and, a little bit anyway. So I didn't really pay too much attention to it.
I'll repeat that quote. My wife had been bugging me last night and, a little bit anyway. First of all, that's not even a complete sentence. He stumbles over the word last, like he was trying to formulate the words, and liars do tend to trail off at the end of sentences when they're lying. It's another one of those tells that I read about, but even if I hadn't, just listening to it, you get a sense that he realizes about halfway through it doesn't sound really good. So did this spill over into the morning, and that's what he was stumbling not to reveal? Now let's talk about that gun found beneath her hand. It's not a tiny gun. I've never held a gun that size, but I suspect it has a bit of weight to it, so that if she immediately went limp when she was shot, her arm would fall down to her side and the gun would follow gravity and fall right down with it. I guess if her finger was still wrapped around the trigger, her hand could pull it over to the left, but it feels like the gun itself would fall straight down, maybe into her lap, and maybe slide off to the left, but it certainly would not slide beneath her hand. Gravity doesn't tuck and roll. Now, if she was seated on that stool and slumped forward at all, it would have fallen right in front of her, and she might have even fallen forward also. And she would not have slumped back against the sliding glass door. So she had to have been sitting on that stool, fairly straight up or even leaning back a little bit, such that her center of gravity was more apt to fall backwards. I could picture her sitting there straight up and looking right up at him as he walked towards her with that gun pointed at her forehead. And don't even get me started on her falling into a seated position on that stool after shooting herself in the head from a standing position. Let's not pretend that's anything but ridiculous. His story evolved on that, too. It started where he heard the shot, but he didn't see her shoot herself. Then, by the last interview in September, he said that while he did not see her fire the fatal shot, he did see her collapse onto that stool next to the sliding glass door. Which I guess he means he turned around just as she pulled the trigger, because surely there was only a second or two between those two things. Detective Miller was pressing him on that repeatedly, and he even admitted it didn't make sense, but that's what had happened. And then there's him picking up that gun. You notice how he told the neighbor he picked it back up, and then he put it back down. In his second interview with Detective Miller, he said he had dropped it back down. That is another tell of sorts, diminishing. Rather than admit he picked up the weapon and then placed it back down, he uses a word like dropped, which gives the impression that it was less deliberate. Clearly there was deliberation involved if he had to lift the dying woman's hand to put the gun back beneath it. What it feels like to me is someone making sure that if his prints were found on that gun, he's just explained that away. And once he tells the police that he did pick up the gun, there's no point in them even testing for his fingerprints because they would expect to find them there. So it's of no value to them at all to test for his fingerprints. It won't tell them anything. The only prints they can test for are Norma's. I think it happened exactly like the neighbor said that Waldron himself told him it happened, based on the fact that the wound was high up in the middle of her forehead and went straight in. Right there, Waldron said, with his finger pointed like a gun in the center of his forehead. If Norma was sitting on that stool at the time, her head would be high enough that I could see the trajectory working and her immediately slumping back against the sliding glass doors like she was found if he walked up to her, put the gun to her forehead, and shot her. Then, all he would have to do is put the gun under her hand and the box of bullets a few inches in front of her on the floor, and voila, crime scene staged. I don't think he planned to do it. I think he was enraged, just like he had been with Barbara and Sharon and Eve. I think he lost his temper, and then after he shot her, he quickly went into self-preservation mode. I also think he's a good liar. Well, I take that back. Maybe not good, but I definitely think he's a liar. As far as that trash, I don't think him taking that out to the dumpster had anything to do with the crime itself other than being an excuse to get him out of the house. I think there was definitely tension going on between the two that morning. But I don't believe the events of that morning prior to his garbage run happened, as Waldron says they did. He says Norma was still in the bedroom, and, as far as he knew, still in bed when he left. Maybe she was. She was fully dressed when he came back, we know that. The distance from the Waldron house to the White Cloud Ziegler roadside park, where he put the trash in the dumpster, is 2.4 miles. That's less than 5 miles round trip. Google Maps gives a generous 10-minute round trip drive time, so we'll go with that, because he said he came back after he dropped off the trash. So, in the time he was gone, Norma had gotten dressed, closed the drapes, according to him, put a bunch of papers in a box after she had gone down to his shed and grabbed the gas and come back up and started it on fire. It is odd, though, that the neighbor never saw Norma outside that morning, whether when she was retrieving the gas can from the shed or when she came out and allegedly fired a random shot from the gun before going in and shooting herself. So what happened? If they didn't have any words that morning, other than him telling her he wouldn't take her to the hospital, does that feel like enough to make her get up when he left and start the cottage on fire? I just don't understand what happened so early in the morning that made everything spiral out of control. We know that she was up around 5:30 and she must have been in pain or upset because she asked Waldron to take her to the hospital. Sounds like she has stomach problems from the interview, but he described them as emotional problems. She was getting herself upset. So I guess she could have been frustrated, angry, or upset about that he wouldn't take her to the hospital. But is that enough to make her want to start the cottage on fire?
Your wife woke you up?
Yeah, she was saying something to me.
What was she saying?
You got to take me to the hospital.
What was wrong?
I said, what? And she said, she gets herself upset.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, no, I'm not going to take you to the hospital. I said, you're doing this to yourself. You're getting yourself all upset.
Okay, but it wasn't that she had some kind of physical problem. She was just getting, emotionally upset?
I don't know if you noticed or not, but it was right there by the bed. She's on that all the time.
Did she have any kind of ulcer problems?
She claimed one time that she did have, but I don't know. I never saw any evidence of it. I know that she just, this was one time, it was probably in January, February, I think, we went through something like this.
Okay. So last night when she woke you up at 5:30 thereabouts?
I didn't come completely awake because I'd worked so hard yesterday, and I mumbled that off to her, and I remembered that part, and I went back to sleep again, and at 6:07 I did get up, and I was going to go fishing.
That fishing trip may have been a bone of contention that morning with Norma. Another thing was the caffeine in Norma's system. She also had diphenhydramine, which is essentially Benadryl. But there was caffeine, and I don't know if she was a heavy soda drinker or tea drinker, and she drank tea or soda throughout the day prior and into the evening, and maybe there was more than a negligible amount in her system when they did the tox screen. But there's also the possibility that she was up that morning with Waldron and had a cup of coffee. One of the reasons I mention that is because, according to her co-workers and Waldron, Norma had been having trouble sleeping in the days leading up to the murder. Does someone who is already having trouble sleeping drink caffeinated beverages at night? That was one of the things I asked myself. Was it more probable that she drank coffee in the morning, or she was drinking caffeinated beverages at night? Now, Waldron himself said she woke him up around 5:30 saying he needed to take her to the hospital, to which he responded, "I'm not taking you to the hospital, you're doing this to yourself." He seems to make light of something that, to me, could have been related to the incident that morning. Norma doesn't feel good. I mean, she feels bad enough to ask him to take her to the hospital. And what does he do? He leaves. Did he even tell her that he left? Waldron said she never came out of the room. Did she even know where he had gone? Did she think he had left to go fishing? Is that why she set that fire? She was so frustrated? Perhaps they had risen together that morning and there was some kind of verbal altercation before Waldron left. Because he didn't come back to the house after he took the trash out to check on his wife that hadn't felt good that morning. He went straight to the shed where, I assume, his fishing poles were. Another thing we have to consider is that physical abuse, because we don't know when her facial bruises and the black eye occurred. We could even suppose that it had happened earlier that morning, before he left. I'll tell you one thing, if my husband popped me in the face and then left to go fishing, he might come back to find me burning his shit too. Like I said, we don't know whether he hit her before or after he left the house, but we also don't know for sure if they actually fought for that gun. That's how he says she got those injuries. I'm not taking anything he says at face value. But if someone is beating on you and you're holding a gun, aren't you going to probably shoot them with that gun to make them stop? Especially if they have kicked you in the face, as he said he did. He kicked his wife while she was laying down on the ground. And then he walks away from her and goes back in the bedroom to take care of the fire that he says flared back up. So he's suggesting that Norma, the woman with the gun in her hand, when she had a chance to do something about the abuse, instead got up off the floor, walked outside, fired off a random shot, and then came in and shot herself, rather than getting up, walking into that bedroom, and shooting him in the head. I'm not sure that makes a bit of sense. Do people really get upset enough to kill themselves because someone else just physically abused them? Does that make sense? It doesn't to me. Make no mistake, I do believe that it was Norma that set that fire. And I think that enraged her husband. I'm not so clear on whether there was any physical altercation before he left to take out the garbage that motivated her to do that. That's why I think it's at least a possibility that he had hit her earlier that morning, before he left the house. Or maybe they just argued and he left. I just find it harder to believe that nothing happened, and when he returned, his wife was trying to burn down his cottage for no apparent reason, other than she was upset that he wouldn't take her to the hospital. That just doesn't sound reasonable to me. If Norma was the one who put the kitty in her car, maybe she was going to set the cottage on fire and leave, but Waldron came back faster than she anticipated. The neighbor said he saw Waldron take the kitty from Norma's car and put it in his truck, which I have thought about repeatedly and I still don't get. Why did he move the cat? All I can come up with is nervous tension, maybe, trying to keep moving, have something to do in between kicking the dirt and cursing at your dying wife while you wait for the ambulance to arrive. Now let's talk about when he returned. The neighbor who was fishing on his dock that morning says he saw Waldron on his own dock. Though Waldron said he wasn't on the dock, he was by the shed. That neighbor heard Norma's screams and saw Waldron run up toward the house yelling, "Get out of there, you bastard." They also saw him go over to the side of the house where the hose was. What he didn't see was Norma come outside and randomly fire off a shot from the front porch, and that would have been in his view. What would not have been in his view is if anyone came out the side door and fired a shot from that direction. That side of the house faced the house that ended up with a bullet in it. On the Down and Away Facebook page, I'll put a couple diagrams that were drawn by Detective Miller that show how they were looking at whether the shot could have come out of that side door or the front porch. I can't figure out why or how that bullet ended up there, other than to say I see just as much evidence that he put that bullet there as there is to suggest Norma did, and that's none on either count. I have no idea what law enforcement's theory was, although Detective Miller did ask him if he had forced her out of the house or they had gone out that side door when he was questioning him, and Waldron said no. If you have a theory in that regard, be sure to comment on the Facebook or Twitter page. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Another thing to consider about this part is Waldron yelling, "Get out of there, you bastard." I think the prosecutor did a fine job of illustrating, through his questioning of Waldron, that it wasn't reasonable for him to be upset with his wife at that point. He had no way of knowing right then what was going on. He'd only just seen the flames. Is this a reasonable amount of time to put together the flames with the missing gas can and come to the conclusion that his wife had set the house on fire? Why was he screaming at her and calling her a bastard if he didn't even know at that time that she had set the fire? What if it was accidental? Or electrical, as the prosecutor asked? He did not know at that time. But he was cursing at her and calling her a bastard. So that suggests to me that there was some tension between the two prior to this incident. If they hadn't been fighting that morning, if there was no inciting incident whatsoever, why would he be mad and calling her a bastard rather than concerned for her the moment he saw flames? And for that matter, why would she be starting a fire if there wasn't anything that made her upset enough to do it? That's your question right there. What was Norma so upset about that she decided to start a fire inside that cottage? Remember what the neighbor said Waldron was doing after he tells him to call for the ambulance again? The neighbor says, "Well, then he's walking around down there in the yard and he's just kicking dirt and walking and goddamming her this and goddamn her that." And I said, "Elton, for crying out loud, that woman is laying in there dying." To which Waldron replied, "If I act so cold about this, it's just because it's the last damn thing I own and she's trying to burn me out." Did you notice the tell about that statement when Detective Miller was pressing him in that long interview? "I can understand this is your pride and joy. This is what you got in life." And Waldron cuts him off and says, "No, that's not true. I got my mother's house." He got defensive, and defensiveness is a tell. He knew where the detective was going. But it's also worth noting that he says the exact opposite later in the interview, when he's being pressed on his finances. Then he hasn't got a pot to piss in. I have to say, I'm not convinced the fire ever flared back up, and I'm even less convinced that he left his wife, that he had just assaulted, with the weapon in her possession and went back to put it out. If it did flare back up, I don't think it happened when he says it happened, and if it didn't, it was just an excuse to explain how she was left unattended and ended up shooting herself. It was barely a fire. It was a box with papers in it that had barely been lit when he saw the flames. The papers inside weren't even all burned. They were later put back into a filing cabinet. The box itself isn't fully burned. I'd describe it as partially burned. And the blankets have small holes in them. Not much of a fire if it doesn't even fully engulf the paper. I think what happened is they argued that morning. Norma didn't feel well. Waldron was in no mood to deal with her and he left, rather than deal with it. Maybe he hit her before he left, and then he stomped out, or maybe he didn't. I'm not sure at what point he hit her, but it could have been both. Maybe he hit her, stormed out, came back and hit her some more when she retaliated with the fire. He said that Norma said, "I can't take this anymore," or "I can't live like this anymore." I don't doubt that. I bet she did. And then, I bet she did what every other woman in his life did when he started physically abusing them. She told him she was going to leave. So then Waldron did what he always did when a woman threatened to leave him. He got angry and lashed out. We know that's a trigger for him, based on his past behavior. He stalked and harassed every woman that tried to leave him. Maybe Norma sat down on that stool to put on her shoes, and he grabbed that gun out of the desk right next to that stool. It was all right there. That cottage was tiny. It's impossible to say with certainty who took the gun out and when it was taken out, but I believe the person who ended up with it was Waldron. He told a few people early on that he had gotten the gun away from her, but his story got murky at that point, and it always trailed off, where he didn't remember what happened to the gun after he got it away from her while he was putting out that fire in the bedroom. I think that's why his later versions changed. He realized it didn't make sense. I think this illustrates the problem the prosecutor had and why charges were never filed. Because when you go to trial, you can't tell the jury you aren't sure who took the gun out, or when they took it out, or how the house next door got shot, or why Norma started the fire in the first place. Juries tend to like specifics that are bolstered by facts and evidence when they're going to put someone in jail for shooting their wife. Even though there may be enough to convince your common sense or mine, the defense only needs reasonable doubt. This may seem like a simple case, but that's the reason I picked it to start with. It's not that simple. Cold cases never are. That's why they go cold in the first place. And cold is the perfect descriptor, harsh and unfriendly, as bitter as the reality of justice having gone unserved. The thing I want you to take away from this, aside from the fact that there was a lovely woman named Norma who died in a way that she shouldn't have, is that cold cases don't equal bad or ineffective law enforcement effort. If I were to guess, it's just as harsh a reality for them as it is for those of us looking in from the outside. The betting gal in me would take the wager that these cases where they couldn't do for the victim what they know needed doing sits with them long after the realization of that injustice becomes a reality. It's like I said in the beginning. Sometimes there just isn't enough.